All right, let's go ahead and get started. Um, Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Larry Luster, and I'm the Technical Assistance Manager at the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition. And we're here today to help folks learn more about the PPP application and generally get an idea of the documentation that they'll need and how they can construct themselves so they can be successful in the application process. Just to give you a little background about ABIC and IBIC, we all live under the umbrella of the American Business Immigration Coalition, and our chapter here in Illinois is specifically tasked with helping small businesses receive technical assistance and navigate our business climate currently through the pandemic. Our model that we've used to do our outreach has been nationally recognized by the Biden administration, and it's called the Navigator model. And it's been recognized, like I said, by the Biden administration and also used to help the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, DCO, do some technical assistance for small, hard to reach businesses throughout the state of Illinois. So enough about us. I think we're going to go ahead and just jump into and have a few brief introductions from some of our hosts and some of our guests. I'm going to start with Senator Robert Peters. Senator Peters represents the 13th Senate District that stretches from the Soul Coast to the Gold Coast, encompassing parts of the Gold Coast and also the outskirts of Stony Island. Senator Peters has been a strong advocate and a strong progressive voice fighting for criminal justice reform and access to equitable resources. And Senator Peters joined the General Assembly in 2018. So without further ado, thank you, Senator Peters, for joining us.
Definitely. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, IBIC, for hosting this. 2020 as well as 2021 has been a difficult time. I sort of talk about this as a period of three crises. We have the crisis of a pandemic, a crisis when it comes to the economy, and we have a crisis when it comes to systemic racism, particularly when it comes to law enforcement. And these crises aren't anything necessarily really new. We knew we had a public health crisis for quite some time. We've known we've had an economic crisis for some time. People have felt like they've been in pain for a while. And we know for a fact that we've had a crisis when it comes to systemic racism. And so, by having this and hosting this for folks, we're able to address these crises head on at all these intersections, due to the public health crisis hurting us economically. And we know that we have an issue when it comes to racial justice, particularly if you have a small business. And so having a breakdown with what PPP is and how you're able to apply to get it, and I think is important because in the midst of this crisis, we have a program that really, really can help small businesses and help those who are working in small businesses be able to get by and to survive. And hopefully, as we get through this, be able to thrive. So I appreciate that everybody is here for the work that they're doing, for trying to survive in this very tough environment. I'm glad that we're able to get more funding, and hopefully we keep getting more funding for this work. And I'm appreciative of DCO and IBIC for doing this and getting this out to the public. The more people know about this, the more we can avoid some of the things that happened last year with PPP and avoid those stories because more people have more money and capital in their pocket. So again, thank you so much for hosting this. I'm honored to be even playing a small role here, and hopefully we can stabilize the economy and stabilize our environment in 2021. And the way I put it is 2021 could be a period where, I look at my neighbor and I say, I'm here to help. And they look at me and they say they're here to help, and that we can actually help each other. And this is sort of a shining example of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Peters. Next, we're going to have Stacey Armstrong. And Stacey, she's a Westchester resident, and she's the owner of actually Speaker Chris Welch's favorite popcorn shop, Shea Poppin' Gourmet Popcorn. So we'll allow Stacey just to give a few minutes to discuss her experience with the PPP.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I had some technical difficulties this morning. My name is Stacey Hawkins Armstrong. I'm the owner of Shea Poppin' Gourmet Popcorn. I opened my first brick and mortar back in 2018 in Westchester. Although it's fairly new, but I am not new to many people. I've been cooking up flavors over 25 years, still being creative in the kitchen. Many have called me different things like the mad scientist of popcorn, the queen of the kernels, things of that nature. But whatever the name is that they're giving me, I'm embracing it with humbleness and gratitude. My dream has always been to open up my own business and to provide quality products to bring joy to many people. I always say life is full of simple pleasures, and I try to bring that with my products to everyone far and near. So in 2018, my dreams came true. I opened up like I said, my first brick and mortar. Um, Everyone loved my popcorn. They opened and embraced me with happiness and joy. I have 50 different flavors on my menu, 130 that I actually customize. Yes, all popcorn. I employ high school students and college students to teach them how to open up a small business and how to run things. I've always been a believer that the future of our businesses lies within our youth. I open up my doors on the closed days that I have for district students and kids to come in and to focus on suicide prevention and cyberbullying, which was a big thing in the community. Unfortunately, in 2020, the COVID-19, the pandemic, it kind of went through the small business community, and we were on the verge of closing down, unfortunately. The dream seemed to be in danger, but I refuse to give up. Small businesses everywhere is a big thing in the communities here. Thankfully, through the speaker, Chris Welch, as you mentioned, I met the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition, and was able to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. The money that I received the program allowed me to stay open, pay my employees, and to adapt to new realities of running businesses through COVID-19. I also applied for the second round of PPP through Seaway Self-Help Program. And in closing, I want to say thank you to the state of Illinois and the elected leaders for supporting community organizations to help small businesses like mine survive, even thrive through new challenging times. And thanks to this program, I'm able to keep the employees on the payroll, develop new ordering procedures, and keep them and my customers safe. I encourage all of small businesses listening to apply, call, follow up, ask questions, but please don't give up. I'm on a delicious journey. I want to continue this as long as I can, and I hope that you do the same.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for giving us your account and your experience through the pandemic, and we're glad that you've been able to maintain and look forward to seeing you thrive in the future. Next, we'll have Tiffany Hightower, and she's the Executive Director of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation, where she's done a remarkable job. If you saw the Black Caucus recently passed the four pillars, and Tiffany did a great job on our PR campaign and also supplying members with information. So she's been doing a fantastic job. Prior to working for the ILBCF, Tiffany served in various leading roles at non-for-profits and with statewide campaigns. So without further ado, Tiffany, will you give us a few words of welcome?
Absolutely, Larry. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Like Larry said, my name is Tiffany Hightower. What I want to say is economic support was imperative for Black businesses prior to 2020. However, economic recovery for small businesses and entrepreneurs has become even more critical in the face of a pandemic that further marginalized the already marginalized. As the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation, we remain committed to ensuring that quality information is shared with the African American communities throughout the state of Illinois. We recognize that there were some disparities during the first round of PPP, so we are hopeful for a different outcome in the second round. So we are just very grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Larry, ABIC, DCEO, and our elected officials that are doing so much to support our small business community. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for those words of welcome. Next, I'm going to introduce Representative Cam Buckner. He's the state representative from the 26th district, which encompasses part of the Gold Coast all the way down through South Shore in South Chicago. Now, just a personal story, me and Representative Buckner have known each other since I was 18, he was 19 years old. Representative Buckner was a football star at the University of Illinois, and my senior year, Representative Buckner was my host on my official visit, so we've known each other for a number of years. Representative Buckner served as the executive director of World Sports Chicago, was a former member of the Chicago Board of Trustees, and a former aide to Senators Dick Durbin and New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu. Representative Buckner joined the House in 2018. So without further ado, can you give us a few words?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And thank you everybody for joining here today. I'll be short, but I'll say, we know that the global pandemic has taken a particular aim at exposing disparities in healthcare and resources for small businesses. We know that, many racial and ethnic minority groups have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And the conditions in the places where people live, they learn, they work, they play, and they worship affect a wide range of health risk and outcomes. And we've seen that on full display during this pandemic. Those conditions that we know to be social determinants of health really highlight longstanding inequities in these groups. Things like poverty, healthcare access, and other things that are interrelated and influence a wide range of health and quality of life outcomes. We also know that Black and brown businesses are closing at a staggering rate, which leads to higher unemployment rates in our community, higher crime, increased homelessness, and growing uncertainty for families, which has become a huge problem in the last few months, or the last year or so during this pandemic. Resources. And in that vein, we know that PPP is a vital lifeline to ensure businesses can stay operational and workers have the ability and opportunity to remain employed, which is extremely important to all of us. So I want to just applaud the American Business Immigrant Coalition on your work and everything that you have done so far and that you continue to do. And Larry, I can't, just to lighten up a little bit, I can't finish up my remarks without
Cam, you kind of cut out there at the end. Okay. Well, Cam, thanks so much. We appreciate you joining us and helping get this information to your constituents and to businesses throughout the state, so we can make sure that they can stay afloat and thrive moving into post-pandemic. Before I introduce Director Guthrie, I want to just acknowledge the fantastic work that her and her team at DCO have done throughout this pandemic. Through the big grant and the PPP technical assistance, you and your team have done a great job at providing resources to small businesses and just making sure that everybody can stay afloat. So I just want to quickly applaud you for that. But Director Guthrie previously was the regional general manager for Uber Midwest, and prior to working with Uber, she was a client engagement manager for a client engagement or management and portfolio manager for McKinsey & Company. Director Guthrie has her MBA from the University of Michigan and her bachelor's from Stanford University, and again has done a fantastic job with making sure that we dig down deep into the grassroots of business communities and communities of color. So just want to applaud her work and introduce her and give her an opportunity to talk about the work DCO's done and other programs that they have available.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for all your continued partnership. I also want to just acknowledge the elected officials, Representative Buckner and Senator Peters, who are joining us today. The Black Caucus has been an incredibly important partner to DCEO and to the state of Illinois in making sure we're responding efficiently and effectively for businesses. So good morning, everyone. I'm Erin Guthrie. I'm the Director of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you about what DCO is doing for small businesses and for forgivable PPP loan through the recently extended program. I'm going to put all this in the chat, so don't feel like you have to take notes after I repeat a few stats here. But I just want to echo what others have said. You know, businesses and chambers have told us that businesses and business of color don't have in-house accountants, personal bankers, and sometimes even relationships with banks to help walk them through the PPP process that other businesses may have. And so we really know that small and minority-owned businesses have felt locked out of the program in earlier rounds. So to counteract this and help businesses get in line for funding, DCO is working with IBIC and a host of other community and business support organizations to provide trained services to help small business owners understand their eligibility and apply for funds. The PPP remains open, and our team of experts and DCO partner agencies have expanded their presence in the community here in Chicago to help small businesses who've not yet received assistance. And these experts are available to business owners to get their questions answered and prepare their application. So I'm going to talk through some of the resources and what you can take advantage of. If you're just starting out and you have questions about the variety of business assistance or latest government information, you can contact our First Stop Small Business Hotline. Again, I'll put that in the chat. It's the first stop where you can get help about doing business in Illinois. We have dedicated DCO staff who will help you dig in and find answers as new programs become available. If you'd like assistance determining, you know, am I eligible or able to prepare a PPP application, we have two options for you on where to call. One is our SBDCs, which are small business development centers. We have 42 full-time centers that help answer questions, match you with a lender, look over your application. And last year, SBDCs helped nearly 1,000 businesses qualify for $78 million in state and federal assistance. So again, I'll put that information in the chat so you can go check that out and look at the website. The second place is, again, the partners like IBIC, Greater Auburn-Gresham Development Corporation, and Chicago Urban League, which are training up navigators. They're organizations that business owners know and trust to offer support in preparing to apply for PPP. So identifying important documents, answering key questions about what funds can be used for, finding a bank near you. These navigators help connect business owners of color with nearly $90 million in grants this past year through DCEO's Business Interruption Grant Program. And they're there specifically to ensure business owners in areas that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID are first in line to receive help accessing emergency programs. So for the most up-to-date information on COVID-19 and funding opportunities, don't forget to check our website. We have actually over 100 upcoming virtual events to help businesses prep on PPP, to highlight businesses that have taken advantage of our programs, to celebrate businesses during Black History Month. And we really would love to have you join those. So this all builds on the over $1 billion in COVID emergency programs launched by the governor. We're still very actively lobbying our federal counterparts to get a COVID-19 relief bill passed, because we know that there's more work to be done there. So thank you all for your patience, for your questions, and thanks to those on the panel for your partnership. So I will turn it back over to Larry and put this info in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. We appreciate your time and all the work that you've done to help these small businesses out. The next person I'm going to introduce, and the last person I'm going to introduce, who's going to give the presentation about how to apply for the PPP and who will also be able to answer questions towards the end of her presentation, is Tracy Ward. Tracy serves as the Director of Self-Help Ventures and Funds SBA 504 Loans Program, and has worked has worked in community development and small business finance since 2004. Before joining Self-Help, she practiced banking law at Moore and Van Allen, representing institutions and complex financial transactions. So without further ado, Tracy, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you so much for helping us throughout the first round of PPP and answer all those technical assistance questions and lend your voice to the federal government as they decided what qualifications there were for PPP. So thanks so much, and we look forward to your presentation.
Oh, thanks so much, Larry. Happy to help go through this. It is a great program and a critical program for small businesses. So want to try and help make it a little bit more understandable so you know what to do to apply and whether you're eligible. So we'll try and talk through some of that today and some of the updates that have been put in place to make this program a little bit more usable, a little bit more helpful for you. So we can jump to the next slide. Thanks. Again, we'll talk through some of the updates. I'll do an overview of the PPP program. We'll talk a little bit about the loans that are available now, and then we'll try and save some time for questions and answers. Next slide. So just as a big picture update, this program, when Congress passed the Economic Aid Act at the end of December, they reopened PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, for first-time borrowers. So if you were not able to get a PPP loan before, you can apply now. The program's open through March 31st. It also created a new option for the really hardest hit borrowers. You now have the option to get a second PPP loan to help you get through the next few months. There are some changes that expanded what you can use your PPP loan for, and also added a little bit of flexibility for the time period that you have to use these funds. Really wonderful change that we were happy to see for PPP loans that are $150,000 or less. Congress required a much simpler forgiveness process and form that you have to complete. So I think that's a really big improvement. You may have heard some things about for borrowers that got an economic injury disaster loan advance through SBA. There were some issues combining the two, and those have been improved. So having an EIDL advance is no longer a problem for you if you also need to get a PPP loan. Other updates before we jump into PPP, just to highlight, the Economic Aid Act created a new program called Targeted EIDL Advances. These again are just for the hardest hit small businesses, but you may be eligible for a grant from SBA of up to $10,000. And if you received an EIDL advance already, but it was less than $10,000, you may be eligible for the difference. So that is something. SBA's website at www.sba.gov is the place to check for that. These are offered directly through SBA. There's also a new grant program that was created for live performance venues. So if you have a movie theater or your business is putting on live shows, that is an option again to check on SBA's website for information. It's offered directly through SBA, and that could be really advantageous for you. So we'll go to the next slide and really jump into what we want to cover today for you is the Paycheck Protection Program and why you might want to think about this and how to apply. Most small businesses and nonprofits are eligible. This program is to keep your staff employed. If you are the only employee of your business, this program can help replace your lost income as well. These loans are 100% forgivable if you meet the program rules. So we'll talk through some of those so you have a sense of how you need to use these funds. Next slide. Eligibility, again, most small businesses, most nonprofits are eligible now. This got expanded a little bit, and but sole proprietors, independent contractors, churches or faith-based organizations, nonprofits generally are eligible for this loan to support their staff, or again, if you're the only employee of your business, to support your lost payroll. You have to have been in business and operating on February 15th, 2020. So this is meant to help organizations that were operating immediately prior to COVID-19's impact. you can get a first PPP loan if you haven't gotten one before, as long as you have 500 employees or less. For the second draw PPP loan, this new provision that was added to really help the hardest hit businesses, there are additional restrictions. So if you already got your first PPP loan and you meet these additional requirements, you can apply for a second PPP loan. Primarily, this is because it is for the hardest hit businesses, it's for smaller businesses now. So you have to have 300 employees or less, and you have to still be operating. If you've had to shut down temporarily, that's okay, as long as you intend to reopen. It's only if you're permanently closed that you wouldn't be eligible for this second draw PPP. The big requirement for second draw PPP, though, is that you have to show that you have had at least a 25% reduction in your gross receipts in 2020 as compared to 2019. So let's go to the next slide and we'll start talking through some of these. If you've never gotten a PPP loan, and this would be your first PPP loan, it's important to remember that the loan amount is based on your average monthly payroll. So you can look at either 2019 and use that year to calculate your average monthly payroll, or you can look at 2020 and use that year to calculate your average monthly payroll. For most businesses and nonprofits, because of all of the disruption that happened due to COVID-19 in 2020, we're finding as we work with folks that using 2019 to calculate your average monthly payroll is going to result in a larger loan amount for you. So in most cases, that's true. When you think about average monthly payroll, SBA is basically documenting this. If you have employees, you're going to need to look at your 941s, so the quarterly 941s that you send in covering employee payroll, your state quarterly employee wage and unemployment compensation reports that you file with your state every quarter. Those are the documents, if you are a business or a nonprofit with employees, that you will use to document and calculate your average monthly payroll. If you are a business that you are the only employee, if typically you probably file your business taxes on Schedule C. So your Schedule C from your 2019 taxes is probably your best option. You can also consider your draft Schedule C for 2020, which you probably haven't prepared yet, so you can prepare a draft, but you'll use that to document what is your lost income that would be eligible for PPP. If you have already gotten a first PPP loan and you meet the requirements, you're one of the hardest hit businesses, so you would be eligible for a second PPP loan. Your loan amount for most businesses is going to be the same as it was for your first PPP loan. It's still going to be based on 2.5 months of your average monthly payroll, either from your 2019 year or from your 2020 year. The act did include additional relief for restaurants and hotels, any business that is in food services or accommodations. If that's your primary business activity, then you're going to get a slightly bigger loan as your second PPP loan amount. Instead of just 2.5 months of average monthly payroll, your loan amount will be based on 3.5 months. So this was intended to really help, some of these industries that have really been struggling, and restaurants, accommodations are the types of industries that Congress felt really needed this extra amount to get through the next few months. Really important as you're thinking about, do I qualify for that extra amount? Congress based this on NAICS codes. These are basically industry identification codes. This is how the federal government categorizes different types of business. There is a box on your tax return, regardless of how you file your business taxes. there is a space for you to enter your NAICS code. It's your business activity code on your tax return. So if you have entered a NAICS code, a business activity code that starts with 72, then you're eligible. Sometimes businesses, because this isn't particularly necessary to filing your taxes, you may leave that blank. If you left that blank on your 2019 tax return, but you are a restaurant or you are a caterer or a bar and you're in the food service business, you can provide documentation to your lender and to SBA to document that that really is your primary business. So your tax return is your first place to look, but if you inadvertently left that blank, you can document it if this is your primary business so that you can get the funds that you're eligible for. I've also included links on this slide to a couple of documents that SBA has prepared this time that are really helpful. One is how to calculate your PPP loan amount if this is your first PPP loan, and it walks through based on the type of business you have or the type of tax filing that you do for your business, exactly what you would look at and what documents you need to gather to calculate your first loan. That second link is the exact same thing, but set up for your second draw loan, and it's going to talk you through those steps. Next slide. So if you are applying for your second PPP loan, again, because this was just for hardest hit businesses, you need to show that you've had a 25% reduction in gross receipts in 2020 as compared to what you were able to do in 2019. SBA has definitions for, what is gross receipts exactly. If you're a business, it's all revenue, whatever source. So you're getting income from sales, if you're getting interest income, if you get rental income, all of that counts. If you are a nonprofit, it's the gross amount that you receive without any reductions for cost or expenses. If you receive grants or income from sales, that counts in your gross receipts. And you'll compare 2020 to 2019. That's if you're doing the full annual comparison. You want to see that there's been at least a 25% reduction if you're to be eligible for the second PPP loan. SBA does allow you to do a quarterly comparison. So that may be easier, especially if you haven't prepared your 2020 tax return. You may not have final numbers prepared for 2020. So you can look at one quarter of 2020 and compare that to the same quarter of 2019. You would want to document that with internal quarterly financial statements, bank statements you could use to document that. So if you're not able to have all of the information to really do that annual comparison yet, you can choose just one quarter. Important to remember, your PPP loan, that doesn't count as income for gross receipts. If you received an idle advance, that does not count as income for gross receipts. So those, if they counted, would artificially inflate your 2020 and would make it hard to make this comparison. So you don't need to include those. And again, I put the link here to SBA's guidance because it also includes exactly how to calculate what SBA is talking about when it says gross receipts, and how to compare that both annually or quarterly if you're doing a quarterly comparison. Next slide. So if you've been eligible and you get your PPP fund, it's important to think about what are the things you're allowed to use it for to make sure that you're staying within the rules so that once you finish using it, you can get it forgiven. Ideally, you can get 100% of your PPP loan, the first one and the second one, forgiven if you follow SBA's rules for how you use it and when you use it. So payroll costs are an eligible use of your PPP loan. It's really important you need to use at least 60% of your PPP loan to cover payroll costs because it really is intended to keep your staff paid. Couple of things to remember there. If you are a self-employed business owner, you may also have been looking at or been drawing unemployment compensation to get through this crisis. You cannot get unemployment compensation for the same week that you're using your PPP to pay your payroll. You get it from one or the other. So you would need to just stop drawing unemployment for the weeks that your PPP loan covers your payroll, and then you could go back to drawing unemployment. Similar concern for nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits receive federal funding that covers payroll. If you're getting federal funding for payroll, you would not also be able to use your PPP to pay that same payroll for that same period. A lot of nonprofits have been able to go back and talk to their funders and get a little more flexibility in using some of those other funds so that you can maximize your operations and get the most relief you can to keep operating, because nonprofits during COVID have been stretched particularly thin to try and serve all the needs that are out there because of this. You don't have to spend all of your PPP loan on payroll. So you need to do at least 60%, but there are some other costs that you can spend your PPP loan on, so that up to 40% you can put on some of these other things, which include if your business has secured debt, so a mortgage on your business building, or an equipment loan. The interest portion of those payments, you can use your PPP funds to pay. Your rent or lease, if you have office space you rent, or you're leasing equipment for your business, you can cover those rent payments. Utility payments you can cover. The Economic Aid Act added a few more categories though to help make this program more flexible and help you use these funds for where you need them. So if you need to purchase PPE or worker protection items, masks, if you need to install shields in your business so that it's safe for your customers and your employees, that cost you can use PPP funds to pay. Supplier costs, if you have costs that are essential to your operations, you can use your PPP funds to pay those. And some operations expenditures. So if you have software systems set up for billing or for payroll or tracking inventory, the cost of those software systems now can be included. So those were good changes to give you a little more flexibility on how you use your PPP loan, and would still be eligible for forgiveness. Next slide. So the other big requirement, if you get a PPP loan, in order to be fully forgiven, you are required to maintain staff. That is one of the big purposes of this program. It's the Paycheck Protection Program, so that you're able to keep paying your staff and keep them employed through this pandemic. It's important, if your PPP loan is $50,000 or less, you are exempt from this requirement. So you still need to use your funds for all of the eligible purposes that we talked about. You need to use 60% for payroll, but you don't have to worry about these calculations of how many full-time equivalent employees you have. This doesn't apply to you if your PPP loan is $50,000 or less. If your PPP loan is over $50,000 though, you do want to think about this. You need to maintain each employee's wages. So you need to keep everybody making at least 75% of the average hourly wage that they were making prior to COVID. And you need to maintain staff hours. So when you look at the total number of employees you had and full-time equivalents prior to COVID, you want to keep that same number of full-time equivalents at the end of using your PPP funds. It's important to think about this as two separate calculations so that you're not double counting against yourself. So a good example of this is, assume that prior to COVID, back in January of 2020, you had an employee, Carla, and you paid her $20 an hour, and Carla worked 40 hours a week. Once COVID hit, you continued paying Carla $20 an hour, but you had to cut back the hours. She was only working 20 hours a week. So if you're asking, was that a wage reduction? No. Carla made $20 an hour pre-COVID. She made $20 an hour post-COVID. So no wage reduction to worry about. It is an FTE reduction though. You have reduced your full-time equivalents. Carla was 1 FTE before COVID. Now she's only half an FTE. So that would impact when you apply for forgiveness. That would slightly reduce your total forgivable amount from, when you do that calculation when you apply for forgiveness. Next slide. It's really important to remember there are exceptions to this. If you had an employee who you had to lay off because of COVID, but you are able to rehire that employee, or you can refill that position with a new employee, then that's not going to count against you when your forgiveness is determined. If you offer an employee their job back and they say no, they don't want to come back, then that won't count against you. You might have to fire somebody. That you may have an employee that's doing something that just can't be tolerated. It's not safe. It's not something you can keep them employed. Then that won't count against you. The big one that I really want everybody to be aware of that was passed and has made it's been a real help to businesses that are in this situation. They have had to reduce employees. If you are unable to operate at your pre-COVID business activity levels during COVID because you're complying with federal or state or local guidance or restrictions or shutdown orders or limitations on the number of people that can be inside your facility. If for those reasons you've had to cut back your staff, that won't count against you. For all of these exceptions, you do want to be careful to keep documentation. Make sure that you can show that this is the reason you have had to reduce staff. And if you meet any of these exceptions, those reductions won't count against you. Next slide. So once you've used your PPP fund, whether it's the first one or the second one, how do you apply for forgiveness? You'll apply with the lender that made the loan. Again, there is a much more streamlined, simpler forgiveness form now for loans up to $150,000. So that's had a big impact and made it much easier for borrowers to apply for forgiveness. And then there are still much more complicated forms if your loan is over $150,000, but some of these more flexible rules that have been passed now will still help you when you get to that point of applying for forgiveness. You should apply within 10 months of the end of the time period for using your PPP loan. So SBA calls the time period for using your PPP loan your covered period. Initially, that was 8 weeks. Last summer, Congress expanded and said, businesses should have up to 24 weeks to use these funds. And so you had kind of a 24-week period to use your funds. In the Economic Aid Act, Congress made an additional improvement and said, this needs to be more flexible. As long as you're using it anywhere from 8 to 24 weeks, that's fine. And you can choose what that time period is as long as you use it either 8 weeks or some period up to 24 weeks from the time you get the loan. Technically, you can apply for forgiveness anytime before your loan matures. So if you got a PPP loan today, that has a 5-year term. So anytime before the end of that 5-year period, you can apply for forgiveness. But you really want to apply within 10 months of the end of your covered period, because if you do that, then your loan stays in deferral until SBA has reviewed and processed your forgiveness request. So you would never have to start making payments as long as you apply within that 10-month window. If you're fully forgiven in that case, you would never have to make a payment. So those are sort of the highlights we wanted to cover about PPP. and I will wrap up there and we can move to your specific questions.
Great, thank you very much, Tracy. I can go ahead and start with a couple of the questions that were asked in the chat box here. To clarify the example that was used earlier, where Carla's wages were not reduced, but her time was reduced, full-time equivalent levels don't change if you cut Carla's hours by half, but then bring in somebody else that also works 20 hours a week, correct?
Correct. So it's not tied to consider full-time equivalents. It's based on all of your employees. So it's not for each individual employee. So if you cut Carla's hours from 40 to 20, but you had another need and you brought in Ron and Ron works 20 hours a week, you've still got one full-time equivalent. It went from Carla at 40 hours to two people at 20 hours each. So you wouldn't have a problem with forgiveness if you did that.
Great, thank you. Before we do any more questions, I very quickly want to point out that we will be sending out a copy of these slides, as well as a link to a recording of this webinar. So you will be able to reference this again, but please, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the Q&A box now so that we can ask them directly to Tracy while we've got her valuable time here. So this question is, we are a nonprofit and pay minimum rent, no utilities, no employees, only volunteers. Can we use the PPP funds as a down payment for a mortgage for an office building?
Unfortunately, no. If you only have volunteer staff, you're not going to be eligible for PPP loan because the loan amount is solely based on your payroll costs. And you may have a couple of people that are on payroll, so you can get a loan to cover their payroll, but you wouldn't have a larger loan amount than what is covering 2.5 months worth of their average payroll. You also, just separately, because I think it might be a broader question for others, say you have employees and so you are able to get a PPP loan amount, using it as a down payment to purchase a building is not allowed. To use it towards interest payments on secured debt, that secured debt has to have already been in place when COVID hit. So you can't go out and get new secured debt and use PPP to pay that.
All right, next question here. If I own several businesses and I myself operate as an independent contractor, am I allowed to apply for each business and for myself as an independent contractor?
So if you have multiple businesses and each business has a separate EIN, employee identification number, you can apply for each business to cover the pay of that business's employees. And that happens a lot. Some people, you may have a restaurant business with one set of employees, and you also operate a separate food truck business with a different set of employees, or maybe an unrelated. Maybe you also have a tailor shop. They don't have to be related. As long as they have separate employee ID numbers, you can get a PPP loan for each one that covers the staff, the employees of that business. If you also operate as an independent contractor and you have income from other entities that you're doing work for, you can apply for your PPP loan. Independent contractors are eligible for a PPP loan to cover their own lost income. If this is a case where you are, and sometimes sole proprietors operate multiple businesses, but everything is through your social security number, you could still apply for a PPP loan that covered the employees of each business, but that's going to be one PPP loan because you have one tax identification number, one social security number for all of those businesses. So your PPP loan would cover all of those employees. The important thing to remember if you have multiple businesses, as the owner, your salary, your income that can be covered from PPP is limited. It's capped, it's going to be your average for the year as well. But if you make over $100,000, it's going to be capped at your maximum loan amount for you as owner is going to be $20,833. And that is across all the businesses that you own. So you can't get that from each business. SBA would look at all the businesses that you're getting income from as owner, and they would apply that cap cumulatively to all of it.
Thank you, Tracy. There's a question here about resources available to help prepare for the PPP loan. I just want to quickly mention, please visit the SBA website on PPP and see if that answers the questions that you have. If not, I will drop my email address, and please feel free to reach out to me and we will connect you with whatever resources we can find to help you get your application done, make sure that it's right so that you can access this program. But Tracy, next for you, can you walk through what documents someone should prepare before they apply?
Yes. If you are a small business, you're a sole proprietor, you file your income taxes for your business on your 1040 Schedule C, then it is that Schedule C that you need to provide to your lender to apply for a PPP loan. That is what SBA uses to calculate your income that can be included for PPP. If you have employees, you will pull together your quarterly 941s that you report your employee wages on each quarter, and your quarterly state employee wage and unemployment filings. So in each state, you file each quarter forms with the state on your employees and their wages and any unemployment compensation that may be applicable for that quarter for those employees. Those are the two primary things you're going to want to collect. You're going to want those for all 4 quarters, either in 2019, if you're using 2019 to calculate your loan amount, or you can get those for all 4 quarters of 2020, if you're using 2020 to calculate your loan amount. Some of you may be working with third-party payroll processors. If you are, then most of the third-party payroll processors have been fantastic about jumping in and making sure they understand the rules of PPP and preparing a report for the businesses that they're working with that lays out in really clear language and calculates the total amount of your PPP loan and what employee funds, what that payroll amount is calculated on. So check with your third-party processor. If they have that kind of report, that is something you can provide to your lender, and that really helps. Not only, if it includes all of the 941 information and the state quarterly filing information, that third-party processor report may be the only documentation you need to pull together. But even if it doesn't, it is a really clear summary of how your loan amount is calculated, and it'll really speed things along as your lender is reviewing it to have that kind of really clear roadmap.
Great, thank you. This is kind of a wordy question, but it's an important one to clarify. So if my loan size is based on 2.5 times monthly payroll, and I can show that that amount is $20,000, can I get a loan bigger than $20,000 by adding in rent expenses and other recurring expenses, or is the maximum that 2.5 times monthly payroll?
Yeah, unfortunately, the program is still set up that the loan amount is calculated solely on payroll. So you can't include anything else in calculating the loan amount. That's set, that's very clear. The slightly good news is once you get that loan amount that's based solely on payroll, You are allowed to spend some of it on rent, but you don't get to include rent in determining what that initial loan amount actually is.
Okay. And this question is from somebody, her and her husband are the only employees of an S corporation. Is their business eligible?
You can be as an S Corp. So I'll back up a little bit. SBA determines a lot of the rules based on how you file your tax returns. Most S Corps are probably filing their taxes for the business on an 1120S. So if that's the case and your business is paying you as an employee and you have 941 filings showing what your business is paying you as an employee, then that amount is eligible. You can get your loan amount based on your 941s. Unfortunately, for businesses that file 1120S, often as the owner, you're not paying yourself as a 941 employee, you're taking distributions from the business. And if you're taking distributions as your salary, SBA does not allow you to include that if you are an 1120S filer. They do have logic behind that. They base a lot of this on payroll that you're paying taxes on. It's unfortunate that's the rule. That's a real challenge for a lot of S Corps. So if you're paying 941 and you have 941s to document your owner pay, yes, you can include that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to.
All right, I know we're bumping up to 12:30 here, but I want to try and get two more questions in, and they should be pretty short ones. For a self-employed individual, is a Schedule C and a photo ID all you need to verify your business as self-employed?
Generally, you also will have to, SBA requires all businesses document that they were operating as of February 15th, 2020. And you will have to provide documentation if you're a self-employed business, some other form of documentation that shows you're self-employed. So things that work for that are maybe an invoice that you sent to a customer or that you got from a vendor that you're paying, and proof of payment, your business bank account. So something like that, your lender is going to have to collect, because SBA for a self-employed business requires that we get documentation you're self-employed, and we get documentation from every business that you are operating on February 15th.
All right, last question here. Can you use the PPP to pay owed taxes?
No. You really are limited to the list on the slide that I showed of what you can use PPP for. Back taxes or even future, even current taxes are not something that would be eligible for forgiveness if you used your PPP for that.
All right, thank you, Tracy. I know we did not get to every question. There were still 10 to 15 questions more in that question box. Please feel free to follow up with me. I put my email in the chat box. Follow up with me. If I don't know the answer, I'll make sure that I get it to Tracy, and I'll get her answer to you. And I'll turn it back over to Larry to close us out here.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to James and he'll get you in contact with one of our accountants to help you out. Again, thank you for joining us. We want to thank our hosts and our partners, and look forward to working with you all again soon. Thanks so much.